Hello, Wildcats. We are now ready to finish James and the Giant Peach, chapter 32. And when the full daylight came at last, they all got to their feet and stretched to their poor cramped bodies. And the centipede, who always seemed to see things first, shouted, "Look, there's land below." "He's right," they cried, running to the edge of the peach and peering over. "Hooray, hooray!" "It looks like streets and houses. But how enormous it all is." A vast city, glistening in the early morning sunshine, lay spread out 3,000 feet below them. At the height, the cars were like little beetles crawling along the streets, and people walking on the pavement looked no larger than tiny grains of soot. "But what tremendous tall buildings!" exclaimed the ladybug. "I've never seen anything like them before in England. Which town do you think this is?" "This couldn't possibly be England," said the old green grasshopper. "Then where is it?" asked Miss Spider. "You know what those buildings are?" shouted James, jumping up and down with excitement. "Those are skyscrapers, so this must be America. And that, my friends, means we have crossed the Atlantic Ocean overnight." "You don't mean it," they cried. "That's not possible." "It's incredible. It's unbelievable." "Oh, I've always dreamed of going to America," cried the centipede. "I had a friend once who—" "Be quiet," said the earthworm. "Who cares about your friend? The thing you've got to know now is about how on earth do we get down to earth?" "Ask James," said the ladybug. "I don't think that should be very difficult," James told them. "All we have to do is cut loose a few seagulls. Not too many, mind you, but just enough so the others can't quite keep us up in the air. Then down we shall go, slowly and gently, until we reach the ground. Centipede, will you bite through the strings one at a time?" Far below, in the city of New York, something like pandemonium broke out. A great round ball, as big as a house, had moved, hovering high up in the sky over the very center of Manhattan, and the cry had gone up that it was an enormous bomb sent over by another country to blow the whole city to smithereens. Air raid sirens began wailing in every section. All radio and television programs were interrupted with announcements that the population must go down to their cellars immediately. 1 million people walking in the street on their way to work looked up into the sky and saw the monster hovering above them and started running to the nearest subway entrance to take cover. Generals grabbed hold of telephones and shouted orders to everyone they could think of. The mayor of New York called up the President of the United States in Washington, D.C. to ask him for help. And the president, who at the moment was having breakfast in his pajamas, quickly pushed away his half-finished plate of Sugar Crisps and started pressing buttons right and left to summon his admirals, his generals, and all the very vast stretch of America in all 50 states from Alaska to Florida, from Pennsylvania to Hawaii. The alarm was sounded, and the word went out that the biggest bomb in history of the world was hovering over New York City, and that any moment it might go off. "Come on, centipede, bite through the first string," James ordered. The centipede took one of the silk strings between his teeth and bit through it. And once again, but not with an angry cloudman dangling from the end of the string this time, a single seagull came over with the rest of the flock and went flying off on its own. "Bite another," James ordered. The centipede bit through another string. "Why aren't we sinking?" "We are sinking." "We're not." "Don't forget, the perch is a lot higher now when we just started," James told them. "It's lost an awful lot of juice when all those hailstones hit it in the night. Cut away 2 more seagulls, centipede." "Ah, that's better. Here we go." "Now we really are sinking." "Yes, this is perfect. Don't bite any more, centipede, or we'll sink too fast. Gently does it." Slowly, the great peach began losing height, and the buildings and streets down below became closer and closer. "Do you think we'll get all our pictures in the papers when we get down?" the ladybug asked. "My goodness, I've forgotten to polish my boots," the centipede said. "Everyone must help me polish my boots before we arrive." "Oh, for heaven's sake," said the earthworm. "Can't you ever start thinking about—" But he never finished his sentence, for suddenly, whoosh, and they looked up and saw a huge 4-engine plane coming shooting out of a nearby cloud, whizzing past them, not more than 20 feet above their heads. This was actually the regular early morning passenger plane coming into New York from Chicago, and as it went by, it sliced through every single one of the silken strings, and immediately the seagulls broke off, and the enormous peach, having nothing to hold it up in the air any longer, went tumbling toward the earth like a lump of lead. "Help!" cried the centipede. "Save us!" cried Miss Spider. "We're lost!" cried the ladybug. "This is the end," said the old green grasshopper. "James!" cried the earthworm. "Do something, James, quickly, do something." "I can't," said James. "I'm sorry. Goodbye. Shut your eyes, everyone. It won't be long now." Round and round, upside down went the peach as it plummeted toward the earth, and they were all clinging desperately to the stem to save themselves from being flung into space. Faster and faster it fell, down and down and down, racing closer and closer to the houses and streets below it, where they would smash into a million pieces when it hit. And all the way along Fifth Avenue and Madison Avenue and all along the other streets in the city, people who had not yet reached their underground shelters looked up and saw it coming, and they stopped running and stood there, staring in a sort of stupor as what they thought was the biggest bomb in the world falling out of the sky onto their heads. A few women screamed, others knelt down on the sidewalks and began praying aloud. Strong men turned to one another and said things like, "I guess this is it, Joe," and "Goodbye, goodbye, everybody, goodbye." And for the next 30 seconds, the whole city held its breath, waiting for the end to come. "Goodbye, ladybug," gasped James, clinging to the stem of the falling peach. "Goodbye, centipede. Goodbye, goodbye, everyone." There were only a few seconds to go, and now it looked as though they were going to fall right in among the tallest buildings. James could see the skyscrapers rushing up to meet them at most awful speed, and most of them had square, flat tops, but the very tallest of them all had a top that tapered off into a long, sharp point, like an enormous silver needle sticking up in the sky. And it was precisely on top of this needle that the peach fell. There was a squelch. The needle went in deep, and suddenly there was the giant peach, caught and spiked under the very pinnacle of the Empire State Building. It was really an amazing sight. In 2 or 3 minutes, as soon as the people realized this now couldn't possibly be a bomb, they came pouring out of shelters and the subways to gape at the marvel. The streets for half a mile around the building were jammed with men and women, and when the word spread that they were actually living things moving on top of the great round ball, everyone went wild with excitement. "It's a flying saucer," they shouted. "They are men from outer space. They are men from Mars. Or maybe they came from the moon." And a man who had a pair of binoculars to his eyes said, "They look pretty peculiar to me, I'll tell you that." Police cars and fire engines came screaming in from all over the city and pulled up outside the Empire State Building. 200 firemen and 600 policemen swarmed into the building and went up in the elevators as high as they could go. Then they poured out onto the observation booth, which is now the place where tourists stand, just at the bottom of the big spike. All the policemen were holding their guns at the ready with their fingers on their triggers, and firemen were clutching their hatchets. But from where they stood, almost directly underneath the peach, they couldn't actually see the travelers up on top. "Ahoy there!" shouted the chief of police. "Come out and show yourselves." Suddenly, the great brown head of the centipede appeared over the side of the peach.
I've read that chapter.
Oh, you did? Okay. Oh, that's the one where